My name is Eleanor Ellie Jean Bernstein Feldman. I was born August 27th, 1932 in Omaha, Nebraska at Methodist Hospital, which was on 32nd and Cummings Street, I believe.
Tell me about your parents, Ellie.
My parents were Anne Frieda Goldberg Bernstein and Isidore Bernstein. My dad was a twin. His brother was Joe. My dad came to this country, to Omaha, Nebraska, when he was 8 years old from Russia. My mother was born in Omaha, Nebraska, and their parents came from the old country. My mother's mother, Ida Goldberg, lived with my mother and dad and with all of us off and on like Al's grandparents did, grandmothers, from one daughter to another daughter, from Omaha to Kansas City. My dad's mother I vaguely remember because she lived in South Omaha, and we did go down to South Omaha many times on the streetcar on 24th Street to visit. But then she moved to California to be with her children, my aunts, out in California, whereas my mother's mother, stayed around in Omaha most of the time and back and forth to Kansas City. I did not know any grandfathers because they were all gone before I was even born. I do know that my mother's father died very young. He left my grandmother with 7 little kids, and I think he passed away when he was like 46 years old, so it was long before I was born. And I never knew my dad's father at all.
How did the family end up in Omaha, Ellie?
That's a hard question for me to answer. I really don't know, because I know that some of the family came in, my mother's side of the family came in from Galveston. But I really don't know, and we never really discussed it. Dad's family settled in South Omaha because the Canner family from Omaha was there. They were, what do you call them, shuttle mates? And they were in Omaha, and they had them come into Omaha.
You mentioned your dad's twin. What other siblings did he have?
My dad there was a family of 9. Dad had four brothers and 5 sisters altogether. Dad's twin, a brother Charlie. I can't even remember, I'm sorry to say. But they're all gone. My mother's came from a family of 7, and I was very close to my aunts and uncles on my mother's side of the family because they lived, most of them in Kansas City for some odd reason, and I used to spend all my vacation time from school, Christmas vacation, spring vacation. Mother would put me on the train, and I'd go down there and spend time with my cousins down in Kansas City, and my mother would call and say, "I have to come home." Her favorite expression was, "A fish begins to smell. Do come home." But I had a great time. I can remember going down Christmas time and just having a ball with my cousins. I'm still very close to them. I saw them all not too long ago. We had a bar mitzvah in San Antonio. A cousin's grandchild had a bar mitzvah in San Antonio. And my 2 sisters and myself flew to San Antonio for the weekend, and I got to see most of my cousins there.
Do you remember your aunts very well on your mother's side?
I do remember them very well. I had an Aunt Gert, who I adored, whose husband was Moe, great big tall guy, and used to play the trumpet, and we would go down there for Passover every year, and he'd bring out his horn, and we'd all go around in a big circle while he was playing. That was one sister. One sister was Esther. One sister was Belle. Aunt Gert, Aunt Esther. And one sister was Laura. And there was an uncle, Uncle Abe, who I adored. He was absolutely fabulous. He read constantly, loved to play bridge. And then there was an Uncle Meyer who lived in Florida, and we weren't too close with them. And they each had children, which made them all cousins to me. And like I say, I'm still very close to the cousins. We talk on the phone every now and then. Now we're into another generation of cousins, their children, and their children's children already.
Tell me about growing up.
Growing up. Let me think. I think I had a very, very good childhood. Uh, my parents didn't have a lot of monetary things to give us, but we always had a lot of clean clothes and good clothes and a lot of good food on the table. My father worked for the Omaha World Herald for God knows how many years, many, many years. He worked nights. And we'd go many times when he'd have a dinner break. Mother would take us downtown on the streetcar to the World Herald, which was on 16th and Farnham at that time. And we'd meet Dad for dinner across the street at the cafeteria, the Henshaw Cafeteria. And I can remember my mother always had a fit because my two sisters and I, no matter what we had to eat, would always take Jell-O. And Mother would say, I make Jell-O at home and you never eat it. But we always had red Jell-O at the Henshaw Cafe. And then Dad would go back to work. And lots of times we'd go down there on Saturday, and of course the Sunday papers were already there. And Dad was in the circulation department, so he had access to where all the papers were wrapped and ready to go out to the delivery trucks. And he'd always hand us the funny papers, and we'd sit there by the machines all blaring away, reading the Sunday papers on Saturday night, which was a lot of fun. We moved several different times. Had a lot of playmates. I went to Saunders School for just probably kindergarten and maybe first grade. Then moved to I went to Yates School first, and then we moved up by Saunders. And I graduated, I stayed at Saunders until I was in 4th or 5th grade. And for some odd reason they thought I could handle it, and I got to skip a whole year. And I was put into 6th grade, from 4th to 6th, which was a very big adjustment. And then my parents moved again out to the Dundee area, and it was very difficult. I could do, academically I was okay, but socially it was a little bit tough because everybody was well over a year older than I was. And they were already starting to they used to have little dances at the Bethel Synagogue for the 7th and 8th graders. And I went, but it was not fun. But my mother wanted me to be part of the social atmosphere.
What did your father do after he left the World Herald?
After my dad left the World Herald, he had a little tiny, like a little cigar stand, they called it in those days, in the main floor of the Saunders Kennedy building, which was on 18th and Douglas. It's a little teeny tiny thing, and he sold cigarettes and cigars and all kinds of candies. And everybody that worked in the building used to come down on their coffee breaks. And my sisters and I would go down there once in a while and just stand behind the counter and talk to the people. It was right next door to Allmake's Typewriter Company at that time. And then the World Insurance bought the building, and they opened up a coffee shop, and they let Dad take over the coffee shop. And he ran a coffee shop as a cafeteria. And he just loved the food business, and he loved his work, and then he retired. And after he retired, he kept Mother crazy for a while, and then he went to work at the hotel out on 108th and Pacific, Regency, and worked in the kitchen making soup. Everybody knew Izzy. And my mother used to cook. When they had the restaurant, Mother used to make big meals in a big roasting pan and take a cab and bring it down to Dad. At that time they didn't have a kitchen ready for him. And I remember her schlepping this great big roasting pan filled with macaroni and cheese so that he could sell it at the coffee shop.
What were the hours in the coffee shop?
Well, Dad was gone by 5 in the morning and stayed a whole day. But he was always an early riser, and I think that's where I get the early rising business.
Tell me about your sisters.
I have a sister, Tevi, who is married to Bernard Turkle. She lives in Omaha. And I have a sister, Sharon Cohn, who moved to Phoenix about 5 years ago so she could be closer to her children. She's been a single mom for many, many, many years and raised 2 great kids. And I always teased her the fact that whatever she did, if she could have bottled it and sold it, she'd be a multimillionaire, because her 2 kids are wonderful, respectful young man and woman to this day.
How about Tevi's children?
Debbie's children, she has 3. Her oldest lives in San Antonio, Texas, and Julie has 2 children. She is married to a major, just recently retired from the Army, and they live in San Antonio. She has Jennifer, who lives in Omaha and has 2 boys, and she has Jeffrey, who lives in Omaha, and he has a little daughter named Olivia, and they're going to have a new baby in April.
Ellie, what was a typical day like in the life of the Bernsteins?
Typical day. Well, for one thing, I remember we had a home that was a block away from the synagogue. We had 1 bathroom for 3 daughters. My dad teased us all the time because every time he was in the bathroom there was hose hanging over the line there by the shower, or bras hanging someplace. And we shared a bathroom, all of us. In those days, that was a big house. But we had a good time growing up.
Were you close with your sisters?
Yes, very close with my sisters, and very close today with my sisters.
How about meals at home?
Meals at home, my dad cooked a lot because he loved to do that, and Mother, and we all did. We all cooked, we all helped, we all set the table, we all did dishes. There was no dishwasher. And I always remember Mother and Dad had a great group of friends, and they always congregated at our home. Nothing for me to wake up on a Sunday morning, or going to sleep Saturday night, or if I was out on a date, which was rare sometimes, coming home and finding all these people there, my mother's friends, and we'd just sit and talk. They were lovely, lovely people, and to this day none of them are left. But I have very fond memories of all of them.
Who were some of their friends?
Bert and Dave Foreman, Jeanette and Sam Ban, Lil and Morris Brick, Rosie Ferenstein, Petey and Phil Ringel. Phil had a drugstore on 50th and Hamilton. They were all very, very close friends of my parents.
What do you remember about your father and mother, their early years growing up?
They were a very, very loving couple. There was a lot of love in our home. I could tell that. Dad did an awful lot to help Mother out, because like I say, he worked nights, and then he'd get a little sleep, and then he was up during the day, and he took a lot of care with us. And then when Sharon, 2 kids were growing up, my dad, because Sharon was a single mother, my dad would go to Sharon's kids' school and take them if they had a dentist appointment or a doctor's appointment. And my little nephew Scott at that time had a broken arm and he couldn't carry his books, and I remember my dad picking him up at school and carrying the books. But he was a big help, very, very kind and generous person.
Do you remember anything about holidays at home growing up?
We spent a lot of holidays at home. We always had company over for a lot of the holidays. Any of the major Jewish holidays, they were always at our home, and always fixed a nice dinner. And occasionally, I can remember very vaguely when I was very young, and we would go to not to Kansas City, but down to South Omaha, where my dad's mother lived, and would spend some time down there, because if you schlepped down on a streetcar, you just didn't turn around and go back home after dinner. We'd spend the night. And she had a house, and I remember a big dining room, and there was like today you'd call them accordion doors that went open and closed. We used to try and play elevator. We'd open the doors and close the doors, and my sisters would be on the other side, and they'd come to the other side, and what floor, please? We pretended they were like an elevator door. And then she had, it was kind of a rooming house, if I remember correctly. And there were chickens in the backyard, and we were a block away from a reed stand. We always got to go down to the reed stand, and for a nickel you got a wonderful chocolate cone.
What kind of entertainment did you have growing up? Movies and so on?
I don't remember too much about that. I don't think we really went to movies, because we didn't have a car. So if we went any place, we had to take a streetcar. I have to tell you a funny little story. I mentioned earlier that my dad was a twin, and my Uncle Joe and Aunt Ruth lived on 50th off of Dodge, and Dad and Mother, we must have lived near, I think on 48th and Webster at the time, but my dad would get on the bus that went down Dodge Street earlier than my uncle, and he'd get on. And if my uncle missed the bus driver would say to him occasionally, "You know, there's a man that gets on the bus, looks just like you." And my dad said, "Really? You have to find out his name. I'd like to meet that gentleman," knowing all the while that it was his twin brother. But they had a lot of people going that way with the twins. There was some funny incidents with the twins. My mother and Dad had two great big wing-back chairs surrounding a fireplace. And when Laurie was maybe 2 or 3 years old, we were over there. And she saw the two men, my uncle and my dad, sitting in the chairs. And she looked at one, and walked over to the other one, and then walked back, and she said, "I have two papas." She always remembered that.
What do you remember about your high school years?
Not too much. I think they were pretty pleasant. I had a few really close girlfriends. Ruthie Mendelson, Doris Band Fox, Marilyn Winthrop Pred. I do remember one of the teachers. I think her name was Miss Clark. And she always walked down the hall covering her head and her face with her hands over her head, like she was afraid to see anybody that knew her. I worked in the registrar's office. I think I was in Glee Club, a French club. I remember a biology class when we had to dissect a frog, which was pretty hard at that time. But otherwise it was just a normal high school, like any other kid, except that I was a year behind most of them, because I was so much younger.
Did you get to the Jewish Community Center after school?
Absolutely. You had to go across the street to the Jewish Community Center. And occasionally my mother would call the Jewish Community Center and talk to Kayla Franklin or Paul Verrett and say, "Is Eleanor Bernstein over there?" And they would say yes, and Mother would say, "Would you please tell her to get on the bus and come home? It's late enough already." And I remember on Friday afternoons I had to be sure and be home because we had to get ready for Shabbos. I have to say that. Because we had to vacuum, and we had to set the table. And that was our chores on Fridays for sure, to make everything ready for Shabbos.
Describe those Shabbos meals.
Well, we always lit the candles. Always had a nice dinner. Chicken soup, chicken. And it isn't like today's kids that don't take time for a meal with the family. We were family oriented to sit down at dinner time and discuss our day. That was just part of our growing up.
Were your regular meals like that too?
Mm-hmm. Most of them were.
When did you start dating in high school?
Probably my freshman year occasionally. I didn't date Al until after he graduated, but he mentioned in his interview that he wrote in my yearbook, "To a cute little freshman, hope I see you around sometime." And that was very true. But I dated Herb Denenberg, Jack Katz. I don't know, went to all the AZA dances. I guess you would consider me a popular person.
Did you belong to one of the girls' clubs?
Yes, Tikvah Sami, with Becky Feiner and Fellman Goldstein. They were a year older than I was at the time. And we became good friends.
What were some of the activities you did in the club?
Didn't do too much. I bowled. I was in a bowling league. I can't remember whether it was high school bowling league or probably one of the youth organizations. And of course, being in the Jewish club, we did a lot of style shows and dances, all the activities that the young girls did at that time.
Did your mother work outside the home?
Not outside the home, but helping Dad at the coffee shop and down at the little cigar stand.
When did you and Al really become an item?
I don't know. It seems like it's been forever. Probably when he was at University of Omaha, when I was still in high school. Yeah, probably my senior year.
That's when you began dating.
Uh-huh.
Was it love at first sight, Ellie?
Oh, I can't remember that it was. We were very, very young. And of course, he went off to law school, and I worked part-time. I worked for Art Gould, and he was a CPA, and I worked part-time for him. And I worked in an office that Jack Ringwald, who was an insurance man, I worked part-time for him. And I was always working part-time and going to school, or at that time, after I got out of school, I went to work full-time. And then, like Al mentioned, I went up to Ann Arbor a couple times, and we got engaged. We had family in, it was over Christmas time, I remember, and my mother's sister and brother-in-law, my aunt and uncle from Kansas City were in town, and we had a nice big family party. And no sooner had they left, and Al came home for vacation, and we got engaged. And I had to call him long distance. Here they were right here, and then I had to call him and tell him we just got engaged, and we're going to get married probably when he gets home in June, which we did.
Tell me about your wedding.
Well, it wasn't like a wedding that the kids have today, because it was just ice cream and cake, some mince on the table, but it was all family, a few outsiders. All of Al's side of the family, his mother's and dad's side of the family were there, and of course all my aunts and uncles came in. And I had 2 or 3 bridesmaids. And Al's sister at that time was like 4 years old. She was a flower girl. And I had a cousin, Carrie, who I just happened to talk to just the other day. They're going to be new grandparents, and she was 6 years old. And she was a flower girl. And I remember we had pale green bridesmaid dresses for Rita Cooper and Doris Van, and they wore great big picture hats. And the dresses were really weird because they were very tight, real full at top and skirt-wise, and then at the very bottom was this real tight fabric around, and they kind of could walk like a little Chinese lady walks today.
Where did the wedding take place?
At Bethel, and at that time Bethel started remodeling. And I was a bridesmaid for Doris Van, and she got married to Alfred Fox, 2 weeks before us, and the rabbi came, or somebody came and said, they're remodeling the synagogue and you might have to move the wedding. And Doris's family moved the wedding because they could afford to get married at the Blackstone Hotel. But my mother and dad said, no way, we're going to have to stay with Bethel. And there were all kinds of scaffolding going on, but it was a nice wedding. The only one thing I do remember was very interesting. There was no air conditioning. It was very hot. And we were standing in front of Rabbi Kripke. And Al was perspiring and took out his handkerchief and was mopping his brow. And then his brother Mike was best man and handed him a ring. And the ring fell out of his hand because his hands were so sweaty. And it rolled right down the steps into the sanctuary. And somebody had to retrieve it and bring it back up. And we had, like I say, just a very simple little reception. And then we had a Shiva Brachas over at my parents'. And some of Al's family went to his Aunt Sarah's house, and some of my family stayed at our house. And then we left right after that. Al's dad gave us their car, and we drove to Ann Arbor. And Al's brother Mike came out after we got to Ann Arbor. He flew out and then took the car back home. And on our way, we stopped in Chicago and Milwaukee so we could see his 2 aunts. And I remember staying in Milwaukee at his Aunt Esther and Uncle Joe's house. And they had a bedroom in the middle of all the other bedrooms, kind of like a passageway. And his Aunt Esther, to this day I remember, his Aunt Esther came in the bedroom. We had already gotten ready for bed. And she came in and she stood in the doorway and she says, I just can't believe my little nephew Albert is married and sleeping in that bed.
How was life as a wife of a student?
It was tough, but we enjoyed it. There was about 6 couples that were all in the same boat. The wives were all working. The husbands were all studying. So the women would get together. And we would, in fact, I even took a sewing class, but I, to this day, can't put a button on, believe me. But then we would get potluck suppers because nobody had any money. We were all starving students. Guys studied all the time, but we did manage to go to the football games, the Michigan games, which was the first time I ever walked into that stadium. It was awe-inspiring, 100,000 people in a stadium for a football game. And one of the times, I have to backtrack here a little bit, one of the times that I went up on the train to spend the weekend with Al, it was a blizzard, and I had taken my Aunt Ruth, she gave me a little fur jacket to wear, but I remember going in the stadium, the snow, you couldn't see the field, it was snowing so badly, but we sat there watching a Michigan-Ohio State game.
What was social life like during those years?
Not much, because we all played bridge. Occasionally, very, very rarely, we'd go to a movie. Like I say, the boys all studied, and we'd all just get together for potluck suppers. Everybody would bring things. We all had little tiny apartments. We had a little apartment, but walking distance of the law school. And I made, in those days you could get orange crates. And I made a shelf out of orange crates and put a little, like a curtain on a little rod to cover up so I could keep my pots and pans in there. And one of the things I remember, one of the first nights that we were in this apartment, I was going to scrub my kitchen floor, which was no bigger than a postage stamp. And Al was studying, and all of a sudden he saw me going to get down on my hands and knees and mop the floor, and he came over and he said, "I will do that for you. I don't want ever see you doing that on the floor." That was the first and only time that he washed the kitchen floor for me. And I thought, oh my God, what did I marry here? Isn't it wonderful?
But this hasn't continued.
Oh, it's in many ways it still has. It still has. He's very helpful.
Then how was your move after graduation to Kansas City?
We moved to Kansas City and had a nice little apartment. I went to work for Skelly Oil Company, and it was in walking distance of our apartment. And I was probably the only Jewish person in the whole stenographic pool. They had never seen a Jew, believe me. And a couple times they would say, "You're Jewish?" And I said, "Yes." And I said, "What did you expect?" Well, they had an idea that maybe I should have horns and a beard or something like that, because they really had not seen a Jewish person. But I was in a steno pool with probably 35 or 40 women, and I walked home for lunch, back down again, and I worked until we moved back to Omaha.
Were things starting to get better economically?
Sure, to a certain extent. We managed to buy furniture for this little apartment. In fact, I had a huge argument with one of my aunts down there. They were wonderful people, and I adored each and every one of them. There were 3 of them there at the time. But they were a little domineering, and we wanted to buy some furniture. And one of my aunts said, "Well, you have to go to so-and-so because he's in the furniture business." And I said, "But I don't want to go there. I want to go to this other store." So we did. We went to, I think it was called Cousins, and they had really nice furniture, and we ended up buying a dining room table and 4 chairs, and they had a fit over it. I've never forgotten that. "How could you do that? You know we would give you a better deal." I said, "But we like this furniture." But anyway, we survived there. It was a little tough, but we survived, and we enjoyed it.
Then when you moved back to Omaha, tell me about that.
We moved back. I think we took an apartment at the Green Lodge Apartments on 35th and Jones. It was a beautiful, big area apartment, but it was on the 3rd floor, which at the time was okay. And then we were trying desperately to have a child. And when I finally got pregnant, we were afraid with the steps and all, because no elevators or anything like that we decided we better move out. And at that time, we bought a little home on 69th and Cumming. It was a brand new neighborhood. And Mother's friend, Dave Fellman, was in the construction business, and he pulled a bunch of strings because there was not telephone service in the area. It was brand new. And Dave Fellman somehow wheeled and dealed and got us, so at least we got a telephone. And eventually we got some furniture. It was a beautiful little house for a first home particularly. And Laurie was born there, and Jody was born there.
Did you have this telephone when you moved in?
We did not have a phone when we first moved in. It took him a couple weeks to get us a telephone.
How did you communicate?
I don't know. I can't remember. I guess we just managed without a phone.
Tell me about your life then when the children came along.
It was very special. Lori was a very special child, being the firstborn, of course. Very easy to take care of her. She was an easygoing little kid. Never put anything out of place, and I figured, oh, nothing to it. And then along came Jody, and I thought, well, I'm going to have another daughter. Nothing to that for sure, but Jody was my boy. She got into more trouble. And our neighbors across the street was Joan and Millard Margolin, and our kids grew up together. And I've known Joan for close to almost going on 60 years, I'll bet. She came to Omaha when she was a bride at 18 years old, and her husband was Al's best friend, Millard. Like I say, the kids grew up together, played outside, learned to ride a bicycle. I remember riding down Cummings Street, holding on to Lori on her bicycle, falling a couple times. Had a lawnmower, which we don't own today and didn't for many years after that. Beautiful backyard. Our neighbors were Margie and Marlon Somberg, and their girls grew up with our girls. Gloria and Donald Van were up the street from us. And it was just a big neighborhood of all our friends, and the kids all grew up together. They're still friends today.
Were you active in school with the kids?
Yes, I was active. I was a brownie leader. I was one of the cookie chairmen. I remember at the time the cookies were delivered so that we could hand them out to the troop, and they were stacked in the living room from the floor to the ceiling, I swear. I was a brownie leader, PTA, active when the kids started Hebrew school. Got a lot of feedback from them. They did not enjoy going to Hebrew school because some of their friends were at Temple, and Temple only went once or twice a week, whereas our kids from Bethel had to go 4 times a week, twice to Hebrew school, plus Saturdays and Sundays. And I would always say to them, you'll survive, you'll manage, you have to do it. And they did. I had a bat mitzvah myself. And I remember an aunt from California came in to buy me a dress. But she also had a very good friend at a store called Carmen's downtown, and we had to go there. The dresses were so ugly, but because she was buying me my dress for my bat mitzvah and from her friend, I had the most hideous dress when I think about it. But that's what she wanted me to wear.
What was your bas mitzvah like?
I don't really remember too much about it. I remember Rabbi Goldstein, Cantor Edgar, and Mr. Saviv, I think, was the Hebrew school teacher. And it was just a very simple bat mitzvah. I really, to be honest with you, don't remember that far back.
I want to hear about your sisters.
My sister. I'm very close to my sister. My sister Tevi has had a major surgery on a lot of things. She's not a really well person, but she pretends that she is. We have taken probably a half a dozen trips together, all 3 of us. It's a little harder now being out this far, and for them still, for Sharon in Phoenix and Tevi in Omaha, but we managed to get together. I went to Omaha, I think it's going to be close to about a year, and I wanted to see everybody, all my close friends there, and I didn't want to stay at their house, so I said I was going to stay at the hotel right there in Regency, and I talked Tevi into coming and staying with me at the hotel for the 5 days we were there, and we had a ball. We had so much fun. Went to lunch with Elaine Bachman and Doris Abramson. I got to see all my friends. We had a little group of about 6 of us, and I got to be with all of them. I'm close to Tev's kids. I hear from them. I'm very close to Sharon's children. I have great love and feeling for them. I think the feeling is mutual. Sharon's kids. Sharon came out here. Amy, her daughter Amy, came out a few months ago. She had a vacation, and she called me and said she wants to come out and come in August. Could she stay? And I said, of course. So she came out, and it just so happened Sharon is a nanny in Phoenix, and her people that she works for were coming out also to San Diego for a vacation. They were bringing Sharon with them. So Sharon was here and stayed and got to spend about 3 days here at our house. And Amy and Sharon and I just had a great time. Amy and I went to a tennis tournament at La Costa. I had never been to a tennis tournament in my life, but Amy was so excited when she found out that there was a national tennis tournament, and she went and got tickets for us. We went to the tennis tournament. And then Amy has a cousin from her other side of the family, on her dad's side of the family, that doesn't live very far from here, and Stephanie had just brand new twins, so Amy spent a lot of time with them. And like I say, I'm very close to all of them.
Tell me about when your girls went away to college.
That was tough. That was very hard. Lori left first, and for 6 weeks I could not talk on the telephone, and I did not break down crying, because it was hard. I took Lori and Jody with me, and we went to Penn to get her registered. Al has cousins in Philadelphia, and we met them and spent a little time with them. We stayed at a hotel the University of Pennsylvania is right in Center City. We stayed at a hotel, and of course, knowing Philadelphia, I've never been to Philadelphia, but it's pretty much all black around that area. And we went into the hotel, and there was not another white person in the place, and I said, I'm not staying here. I was scared to death, which was stupid, but that's the way I was at that point. Anyway, we got back, took our luggage, came back downstairs, and got a cab, and I said, we want to go to another hotel, so he took us to another hotel, which was like across the street. Went around and around to get to it, but actually it was across the street. We met, like I say, met the cousins, had dinner with them, and Jody and Lori and I stayed up almost the first night in the hotel, talking about all the family. They all both girls wanted to know all about the aunts, uncles, and all the cousins. And it was very hard to leave her, but I knew she was in a good school, and I knew she'd be happy there. And it was, like I said, it was very hard. She did not come home when we took her to school. She did not come home until Christmas time. She didn't come home Thanksgiving, and it was Christmas before she came home again. And of course, we went to school, took her to school in like August, so it was a long time. She had a couple good roommates, and she went into New York City with one of them for Thanksgiving. And then Jody also went off to school, but was a little easier for me this time, letting her go. But it was still very hard. The kids leave the nest. And I went to work for my brother-in-law, Bernard Turkle, who was a dentist. He's now retired. And I worked for him probably 13, 14 years. And one day I got up and said, I don't want to be a dental assistant anymore. I got to find something else to do. And unbeknownst to anybody in the family, I went down to the College of St. Mary to find out about going to school and see what it entailed. I found out, and I came home and I said, I'm going to go to college. And I'm going to enroll in the College of St. Mary. It's a nice little girls' school. Classes are very small. And that's what I did. I still worked for Bernard part-time until I decided as long as I'm going to college, I might as well go and get a degree. And I quit. I quit Bernard being a dental assistant and enrolled full-time at the college. And I have to say it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my entire life. I met women. I actually felt that I had never been out in the real world, so to speak. And I met women. One of them, to this day, they're all still friends. I still correspond with them. One of them had 14 children, was widowed when her youngest was like 2 or 3. Her husband was killed in a hunting accident by his best friend. One of them has 12 children. One of them had 11. One of them had 9. In fact, at Jody's wedding, when my cousin Larry came from Kansas City and the women were there, and I told him there was 40-some, maybe close to 50 kids between all of them, he'd almost passed out on the floor.
Who are some of the women that you were friendly with there?
One of them was Mary Ray Wolf, who now sells real estate, who was just lovely. One of them was Ellen Gross-Rody, who had the 14 children. One of them was Judy Tamasia, who is now something with the Diocese of Omaha, of the Catholic Diocese. She's got a very big job. Madge moved to Tulsa. Phyllis Glazer was going to school part-time, was part of our lunch group. Our lunch group was unbelievable. I learned so much from them in our little lunch group, and I come home and tell Al all these stories of things that are going on in the world, And he would say to me, I'm not paying that kind of tuition for you to have such great lunches. Get too busy and study. Anyway, we loved studying, and the professors loved having the non-traditional student because they were there to learn. And Ellen and I, they were in the process of designing and building a new library on the campus. And Ellen and I got picked as the non-traditional students to put our input into what a library should be, particularly for non-traditional students. So we were on this committee, and we did a lot with the committee. And at one point they said when the new library was open, they were going to bronze a chair for each one of us because all we ever did was study. And I had one little nun who worked in what they called the learning center, I think they called it, where you could get extra help because I was doing very good, very well, except for, not calculus. Statistics. I could not get the hang of it. And the professor was just really not very helpful. All he would tell me was, you came here, you got to learn, you got to do it. I can't help you. And one day I couldn't do any better, and I broke down and cried in class. I was totally embarrassed, and that was the worst. Anyway, this little nun helped us with the little cards so that we could memorize the cards so Ellen and I could take the final. At least I passed because I needed it. Also, you had to have, because it was a little college girls' school, you had to have theology. And I learned a great deal on that subject with a lot of the religion. I also, beside Phyllis being part-time and I was full-time, Phyllis Glazer, I was Jewish, I am Jewish. A couple times I would take things to one of my classes because they were talking on different religions and they knew nothing about Judaism. And I remember taking a menorah a couple times. I took a prayer book. I explained most of the holidays to this particular class, which I enjoyed doing because I think they got a lot out of it. But, there were most of them were farm girls that come into the big city, and they wanted to have a good time, even though it was a little girls' school. But we were there to study, and of course some of the students really resented the fact that we were always the ones that took the tests and got good grades, and we were always the ones speaking out in class, questioning what was going on, because they could care less. But it was a great experience, and my uncle and aunt in Kansas City came up for graduation. Our daughters came, our son-in-laws came, and we had a lovely graduation. Senator Bob Kerry spoke, and then we had a nice dinner at the restaurant on 10th Street.
Cantonic?
I can't think of the name of it.
What did you study?
I just merely took classes so I ended up getting a degree in business because there wasn't really much else at that time that appealed to me. I didn't want to go into nursing. I wasn't going to go into anything that required anything towards nursing. You had to take a computer class. That was mandatory. So I did business. I did a little, you had accounting and business and all the business courses, which I really enjoyed. I had a great professor. And like I said, it was the most rewarding experience of my life.
What did you do after you finished school?
After I finished school, I went to work. Al came home from the law library that was in the courthouse, and Carol Gendler ran the library. And I don't know, he must have been in there and talking to her or something, and he said, Ellie just finished college, and Carol said, I need somebody to come help me in the library here at the courthouse. So I went down, and I worked for her part-time for a little while at the law library, at the courthouse. And then I don't think I really did too much of anything else.
Went back to being a full-time mother.
Mm-hmm. Nobody was home, so it was just the two of us.
I'd like you to talk about your children and their marriages.
Our children. Like I say, Laurie is the oldest, married to Gary Kane. They have 3 children. Zachary is 16, driving this year. Hannah and Josh are twins, and they're going to have a bar and bat mitzvah in December. We all were in San Rafael for Zachary's bar mitzvah, which will be 3 years coming up in November. And a lot of family came for that. we're very close to them. I talk to them on the telephone. Every now and then they'll call and say, "Hi, Grandma, how you doing?" Or I call them, make sure they say hello. And they always say, "I love you" when we hang up, which is very special. When we're there with them, all we do is schlep around from one ball game to the next. We went probably 2 years ago to, our Hannah was in a girls' basketball tournament in Reno. So we flew up to San Francisco, to Oakland, and drove with them to Reno. We were there for about 4 days. At this gigantic, we're 3,000 little girls playing basketball, if you can imagine, over different courts here and there. It was spectacular watching her play basketball. Josh plays basketball. He also takes piano. Hannah takes guitar. They are so busy. And then the younger one's Jody is married to Rob Flashman. They have Andrea, who will be 7 next week, March 11th, or 2 weeks. Bradley, who's 8. And Jody's in-laws live in Teaneck, New Jersey, and they are lovely, wonderful people, Carlene and Seymour. Carlene teaches at an after-school program about 10 minutes from her house, and Seymour just retired. He'd worked for the government in New York City for many, many years. And Gary's parents passed away quite a few years ago, and they were just lovely, lovely people. And Carlene and I talk on the phone probably at least once a week, and we saw them not too long ago. We try, because they come out to see the kids, and we always make sure we get together with them. They're thinking of moving out here to California because they want to be closer to the kids, and hopefully they will, which will be very nice. Jody's kids, we're going to try, they're an hour and 10 minutes away from us door to door, and it's hard. We try and get together. I haven't seen any of them now for a while because they're just too busy. They have too many activities for my opinion. Well, I think there are too many activities. With Hebrew school, brownies, soccer, basketball, baseball now. They're just going and going and going.
Since you've moved out to California, Ellie, how's your frame of mind?
It's pretty good. I'm very, very happy here, other than missing close friends in Omaha, my sisters. But I've made a few friends. I've known Joan, like I said, Joan Margolin Gardner for so many years, and of course she's got me into a few, with the different friends, some of her friends, and I met 2 other friends. I play in a Maj group once a week on Fridays with some lovely ladies. And now I've started to play another Maj group with some ladies from an organization called ORT. Belong to Adasa. And otherwise, I love my home, our home. And I'm content to just be here. We're both, thank God, in good health. And hopefully stay that way. I'd like to say one more thing. Meeting the ladies that I did at the College of St. Mary, and all of them were real Catholic ladies, I had invited 2 of them to come to one of our seders one year. And I told them they could only each bring 1 child, because I could not have all of them. And my friend Ellen brought her youngest at that time. And we had the cup for Elijah, and opened the door, so forth. But her little girl, I can't think of her name, I'm sorry to say right this minute, sat there watching that cup the entire evening, waiting for Elijah to come in the door to drink the wine. But they were quite impressed with the Seder. And many years later, if I'd run into 1 or 2 of them or talk to them on the phone or something, and they'd say, "We sure miss not coming over to your house for a Seder." And I also had Mary Ray and Ellen and I had a party for our professors from the college. We had it in our backyard. We had all of, well, at that time there were maybe 2 or 3 priests. Most of them were lay people though, and the nuns. And they came, and we had a big picnic in the backyard, and plenty of booze for them because they do like to drink. But anyway, we had a great time, and like I say, I'm still in contact with most of them. After I worked at the law library downtown in the courthouse, I decided, or someone contacted me, that I could come work in the library at the College of St. Mary, which I just jumped into it. But they also said but they could not afford to pay me anything because they were on a very low budget. So I said, I'll make a deal with you. Can I take a class or two just to take in exchange for working in the library? Well, they had never heard of anything like that, so they had to go to the board, and they had to go to this one and that one, and they said, okay, you can come to work, which I did, and I enjoyed it very much. I was trying to order books on a computer, and at that time, of course, I could still see people coming and going, and all the professors and the people that I knew there from the college, and it was a beautiful, beautiful library. Since I still get the bulletins from the college, and I guess they've just been building like crazy. They've got dorms now, which they never had before, and it's really a very lovely little college right in the city. This interview or discussion or whatever you would like to say, whatever you want to call it, I want to say in closing a message to Jody, Laurie, Gary, Rob, and the grandchildren. We love you very, very much. We're very proud of all of you. You've brought us much nachas, much joy in everything you do. And I hope it'll continue and pass down to the 5 grandchildren how much we respect and feel and love you. And I hope you feel the same with us. I want to say also again to Gary and Laurie and the kids, our trip to Israel was just a fantastic and enjoyable trip. And I hope Hannah and Josh and Zachary will always remember it with loving thoughts. We certainly will. And to Bradley and Andrea, you are a joy to have and to see and to be with. And may you always continue to be. We want you to have lots and lots of love and respect for your parents because they're wonderful, wonderful people. They're bringing you up just beautifully. Your Judaism is very special to all of you and hopes it continues. Zachary, I know your driving is going to improve tremendously, even though now you do very, very well. Sometimes you go a little fast, but that's Grandma, because I'm not used to going fast like that with you. But anyway, just keep well, take good care of each other, be respectful to your parents. We, like I say before and say again, we love you very much. We're extremely, extremely proud of all of you. And hopefully we'll spend more time together as the years go on, even though I know, Zach, you're getting ready to go off to college, so who knows, but I know we'll always be in touch. Just remember that Grandpa and I love you very, very much and hold you very dear in our hearts and always will.